Hi, I'm Stefan Marceau. I'm your host for the Nano Cruising Podcast, a podcast about trailer sailing, dinghy cruising, and small boat adventuring, which you can find anywhere you can download podcasts. Today we have Trapper Haskins. He's a musician, he's an author, a boat builder, and he's got a great story to tell about his adventures on the Mississippi. Today we have Trapper Haskins joining us on Nano Cruising. Trapper has written a book called Crooked River. It's a great story. We'll get into that. A story of going down the Mississippi, but really a story about his life too, how he went all over the place. So welcome, Trapper, to join us. It's great to have you.
Very glad to be here.
And a great book. I really enjoyed it. Read it really fast. So it's...
You did?
Yeah, I'm a fast reader, but it's a really, really good book. Very intense. So I guess if you could tell us, for people who haven't read the book, give us a synopsis quickly of the of the story of it, really, your journey, really. So
I was born and raised in Memphis, sort of near the Mississippi River, and so the whole Huck Finn, mythology has always been pretty close to my heart. And when I was in my 20s, my newlywed wife and I moved to Maine, where I learned to build boats. And while I was there, I built a Mississippi River Yawl, YAWL, which is sort of a work boat from the 1800s. This would have been something that the hunters and the trappers and stuff used in their daily work on the river in the 1800s. And so we built that boat with the intention of going all the way down the Mississippi from the headwaters to the Gulf. We were up in Maine at the time, been up there for 2 winters, and was starting to kind of learn to love the place that I had left. It's hard to love your hometown, until you leave.
Yeah, I can relate to
that.
Totally relate
and so
to that.
we intended to go all the way down the Mississippi. This was the summer of 2002. And it was a trip that was supposed to take 90 days, and it ended up taking us 16 years because
don't give everything away, but yeah, absolutely.
We went from the headwaters to Minnesota, and then 16 years later went back to the place where we had pulled the boat out of the water in New Orleans and did the remaining 100 river miles down to the Gulf. So completing it over 2 trips that were 16 years apart. So
nice.
That's the basis of Crooked Old River.
What drew you first to say, okay, I want to do the Mississippi River? Because you did it from the head of, I forget the name, Itasca? Something like
Lake Itasca.
Right? So what put that into your mind, the idea to do this? It's not common for a lot of people, right? So.
Yeah, I think that looking back on it, I think it was always sort of subconsciously there because, so in Memphis, downtown, there's a place called Mud Island River Park.
Right.
And it is, it's actually a peninsula, but it's right on the Memphis waterfront. And down there is the city built a 1/4-mile model of the Mississippi River with all the twists and turns, and the contours of the riverbed are there. So some parts are deeper, some parts are shallower. And when I was a little kid, my mother would take my sister and I down there, and we would get popsicles from the snack bar. And when we were done with our popsicles, we would just throw the sticks in the water. And there's water flowing through this model. And at the end of the model is what was at the time a public pool that's the shape of the Gulf of Mexico. And so we would follow these popsicle sticks down the model of the Mississippi all the way to southern Louisiana, a concrete version of Louisiana. But so I think that sort of that Huck Finn mythology was always sort of in the back of my mind. And it wasn't until we were living in Maine, having left my hometown and thought, well, I'm done with Tennessee. Now I'm a New Englander. I live up here, and sort of made a new life working on boats up there. And it wasn't until I was up there that I began to miss the place that I had come from, sort of recognize the power and the beauty of the Mississippi for what it was, and started to kind of, homesick may not be the word for it, but I wanted to kind of reconnect with the place that I was from. And when I found the designs for this Mississippi River Yawl in the library I was going to a boat building school called the Apprentice Shop.
Oh, so it is
in
actually a
Rockland.
Mississippi River Yawl. It is.
Uh-huh.
I didn't realize that. Okay, nice.
Yeah, so I was in the library of this boat building school that I was going to, called the Apprentice Shop in Rockland, Maine, and I found the plans, just tripped across these plans for the boat, and all of a sudden those memories of the popsicle stick and the model of the Mississippi, all those memories started flooding back. And I thought, well, it was a 2-year program that I was doing, and I sort of had this fantasy that, well, maybe while I'm here I can build this boat, and as a sort of graduation gift or whatever,
nice,
my wife and I can go down the river in it. So that that was sort of the catalyst of it, was leaving Memphis and then just tripping across the plans for this boat,
right,
purely by accident. Yeah.
So the trip turns out, like you say, you reconnected. You wanted to connect you back home, but you connected too, I think, with the whole history of the people. And I found the city across St. Louis that you mentioned that I didn't even know about. That
Cahokia, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't even. I think I remember seeing a documentary about that.
Yeah, there's all sorts of fascinating things. The Native Americans. Growing up in Memphis, we would go to this place called Chucalissa, is what the Europeans ended up calling it, but it was a small mound structure south of Memphis. And I remember being a grade school kid riding the school bus down there and seeing this earthen mound, and seeing these burial sites and these reconstructed homes of Native Americans. And so, we as Americans think about Mark Twain, again, Huck Finn and all that stuff, and to us, that's the early Mississippi. But, Cahokia was the largest metropolis, in this hemisphere 1,000 years ago. And so all of those sort of colliding histories were always interesting to me. And so as I started to think about this river trip, the only part of the Mississippi that I had ever seen before was the Memphis waterfront, where for a time I worked on those sightseeing paddle wheelers,
right,
that would just parade back and forth, up and down the Memphis waterfront. So to me, it was a half-mile wide river that, we were warned as kids to stay away from it. It's a dangerous place. But as we started to think about this river trip, I just obsessively ordered books and stuff about the history of the different cultures that had lived along the Mississippi. And to me, it was a way to, not only connect with the Mississippi that I knew as a kid, but the Mississippi that had been there long before Europeans were here. So just the whole arc of history of the river valley.
Also, you connected with the current and the previous river men, or boatmen, I guess, that earned their living on there. You seem to have a kinship with them, I think.
Yeah. And again, I think it all goes back to that popsicle stick floating down the river at Mud Island, because I remember imagining that thing as a flat boat or a keel boat, Mike Fink on his keel boat or whatever, because attached to this river park, there was a Mississippi River Museum, and inside that museum, they had a replica of a steamboat where you could stand at the wheel and steer a steamboat. They had dioramas with Indian canoes and dugout canoes, and they had the flatboats with the original, the Kentuckians and the Ohioans would float their produce down the rivers to New Orleans, and then sell the boat when they got there, because there was no way to take the boat back up against the current. Right. So they would sell the boat for lumber and then go marching homeward with a pocket full of cash. And that's just
build another one.
and build another one. Or they might just blow all their money in New Orleans, on wine and women, and go back home to Kentucky.
And the rest is just wasted.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
yes.
Yes. So tell me about just to put us there a little bit, your physical and emotional connection to the environment and its people. How does that feel? How did it feel?
Yeah, for me, it felt like it was like a homecoming. But I've often said it was like a homecoming, but I took the scenic route because we had to go about 1,500 miles to get there. But yeah, we got the boat built, and the intention, as I said earlier, was to start at the headwaters of it. Well, this was a time I didn't have the internet. We didn't have a cell phone. There weren't Facebook groups and stuff about doing the river. I remember ordering maps from the Department of Natural Resources of Minnesota, and there were photos of Lake Itasca and the early miles of the Mississippi on there. And it became apparent very quickly that an 18-foot rowboat with 9-foot oars is not going to fit on this river. You know, again, being a Memphis kid, it's this, to me, it's a half mile wide, but you know, it's got to start somewhere. Where it starts, it's only, 15 feet across, and it's only ankle to calf deep. We ended up borrowing a canoe.
Yes.
And we did the first 500 miles in a canoe. So we left the rowboat in St. Paul in the Twin Cities. And to me, I kind of talk about it in the book, where I'm kind of a completist about things, where if I decide I'm going to do something, if I do 90% of it, it sort of feels like there's an asterisk by it. And, fully 1/4 of the river, 500 miles of it, are north of Minneapolis. And so we borrowed a canoe to do the first 500 miles, and then swapped out to this riverboat that I had built. But as far as connecting, feeling connected to the river, it was really, it felt like a homecoming. I remember when we got to the boat at the marina in St. Paul, and we backed Oxbow, which is the name of the yawl boat. We backed Oxbow into the Mississippi, and it sort of felt like, well, now she's home. This is where she was built in Maine, but she belongs in these waters. And really feeling kind of emotional about, this is where she belongs, and this is where I belong. Right. And sort of maybe for the first time started questioning my decision to leave the middle of America and go to one of the coasts.
So what do you think is the difference between the canoeing and your rowing, besides the obvious position you're facing backward and forward? How did it feel, and how happy were you with the boat that you built, right?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
You're tuning into Remote Trails Radio. Garrick, you have 35 seconds to answer 4 questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
What are the collection of back roads in Washington that you can discover called?
The Washington Backcountry Discovery Route.
On the trail, what's a helpful hand gesture to give the driver you see going the opposite direction?
Oh, you got to give them the shakas.
A number of fingers for number of cars behind you. What are skinny tires called?
Oh, man, I got some of them. They're pizza cutters.
Which podcast is packed with overlanding advice, P&W gems, and outdoor stories?
That would be the Remote Trails Radio.
Yeah, so we started in the canoe, but we did the first 500 miles in a canoe simply because our boat was too big for the upper river. But I didn't own a canoe, so we borrowed a canoe from someone. And I think that until that trip, I think that my canoeing experience and my wife's canoeing experience, probably together, we had spent 30 minutes in a canoe before paddling. We were not what you would call seasoned paddlers, but we, that was the boat that the river required there. And so once we got done with the first 500 miles and got into our boat, there's the very obvious aspect that when you're canoeing, you're facing forward. You're seeing the bends as they come up ahead, and when you're rowing, you're looking over the stern of the boat, and every couple of strokes you're glancing over your shoulder, because by the time that we were on Oxbow, the yawl boat, we were at a point in the river where there were barges and stuff. So we were constantly looking over our shoulder for barges and such. Now, I will say, and I was really happy with the way that she rowed. She's about a 500, 600-pound boat. So 1-inch thick pine planks on oak frame. So it's traditionally built with with cotton caulking between the planks. And so she's a really heavy boat, but what that means is getting her started takes quite a bit of effort. But once the boat is moving, there's so much momentum in 600 pounds moving through the water. We just had to keep her going. Now, these boats, when they were built in the 1800s, they were also outfitted with sails. And so my wife sewed a sail for this. It's only about a 72 square foot sail. So the boat's 18 feet long, about 5 feet wide. She's got a swing keel. So there's a centerboard that swings down to act as a keel when she's sailing. And there's not a rudder, but you just take one of the rowing oars and throw it over the stern, and then that becomes your rudder.
Right.
And so I remember having dreams of just sailing this thing downriver while I was building it. And the thing that it was sort of a rude awakening getting out there. One, that there's barges all over the place and you don't want to be tacking in front of them. But the other thing is, when we did this journey, we started in July and we got down to New Orleans around Halloween. And the majority of the time, the winds were out of the south, sometimes heavy, sometimes not so heavy. But with a headwind, it would have been really beautiful if we'd had a tailwind. That kind of boat would sail really nicely, just kind of going downriver. But as you know, if you're trying to sail into the wind, you've got to tack back and forth. And because our boat with the centerboard up only draws about 3 inches of water, we were trying to stay more towards the side when we're trying to stay out of the channel when there were towboats in the area. So the notion that we were going to be sailing in front of towboats was not going to happen. And so we ended up sailing, I think the entire journey is over 2,000 miles. I think we sailed 12 miles.
Wow. Mississippi. So is that normal that the wind is from the south on the Mississippi?
Yeah, I think the south and southwest really. A lot of south and southwest wind. So we were getting, maybe not a headwind. Sometimes it would have been over the beam, but as far as getting a tailwind from the north in the summertime, no. Is a rarity. Yeah, so is a rarity.
Rowing. So I mean, it's good exercise, definitely. So
it's great exercise. We rowed about 8 hours a day.
Yes.
And
tell me about your days. Yeah, your days.
So we would we would eat breakfast in the boat just to kind of hopefully get a mile or so while we're drifting with the current, and then we would just row all day. And before we had done this trip, much like the canoe, Mandy and we'd rowed around the harbor in Rockland, Maine. But as far as any kind of distance, any kind of enduring rowing, we had never done that before. And so I think the first day or two, we were clanging our oars together because there's 2 rowing stations. Mandy's up in the bow, and I'm more astern. And we were clanging our oars together and having trouble steering. But, we got locked in after a couple of days.
Nice.
And just moved like a machine. But we would row for hours and hours at a time. And we would stop at lunchtime. When we were ready to eat lunch, we would stop, bring the oars on board. And I would look at the charts because the Corps of Engineers, they produce these navigation charts of the Mississippi.
Yes.
And there are certain buoys and day markers that tell you where you are. And so I would kind of locate where we were on the river, and then we would float for exactly an hour while we were eating lunch.
So you just drift
for an hour while we're eating. Nice. And at the end of that hour, I would then find out where we were on the chart, and I could say, oh, okay, we are a mile and a half or 2 miles away from where we started. So we knew that the current was going, a mile and a half, 2 miles, sometimes 3 miles an hour.
Right.
But it didn't go nearly as quickly as I sort of thought it was. Growing up, you think, oh, this big river is just bombing along at 10 miles an hour. And I'm sure that it does when the water's high and things are flooding. But in a normal summer, which I think the year that we did it was a normal summer, it's really only running about 1.5 miles to 2.5 miles an hour.
Okay.
We would row all afternoon, and then we didn't have designated camping sites. A lot of the upper Mississippi is part of a national wildlife refuge.
Nice.
And so there are just islands
That
and
was
back
easy.
channels
Right.
everywhere, and they're essentially deserted out there because it's a
Mhm.
wildlife refuge, and I don't believe there's any laws about not camping out there. And so, about 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, we would start to kind of keep an eye out. We would just, if we saw a great place, nice sandy flat spot, we would stop. If it looked, muddy and really steep, we would keep going. And, almost invariably, if we kept our eyes peeled for an hour or two,
Yeah.
we would come across something that would rival any saltwater beach you've been. I
Nice.
mean, just sand
Wow.
everywhere.
Wow.
Yeah, sand everywhere, and nobody out there except for there was one weekend when Mandy and I could not figure out where did all this traffic
I
come from. There's
remember that.
nobody ever on the river, and now there's power boats everywhere. People are camping on there. Like, what is going on?
It
And
was
then we
Labor Day.
realized it was Labor Day weekend.
You're
Yeah,
just
yeah.
so out of touch with the real world,
So
which
out of
is
touch with
awesome.
the-
That's a great
yeah,
example. It's like that's so
yeah.
awesome that you're
And it's a good
living the
feeling to
moment.
sort of unplug from things so much that
Absolutely.
the holidays that are on the calendar and the days of the week just sort of disappear from you, and you kind of get more into this rhythm of sun up, sun down, rather than the rhythm of the days of the week and living for the weekend kind of thing, because Monday was the same as Sunday was the same as Friday for us.
Right.
But not the workaday world, especially on Labor Day weekend.
What's some of the challenges that you had navigating, or any challenges that you had while you faced? I know the memories probably you tend to remember the good stuff, but there's probably challenges and
Sure. Yeah, we most of the people that we met were just incredible. And I know that anybody you talk to that talks about traveling by boat or traveling in just some unconventional way, oftentimes you think it's going to be the scenery that's memorable. You think it's going to be something that it does for you that's memorable. It's just the solitude or something like that. But the people that you meet are, I mean, by and large, they're mostly incredible people. They maybe harbor some desire to do what you're doing, so they kind of live vicariously through you. And those
True.
are exciting. And I love sharing our story with people, especially when we're on the water. But then you can trip across people who've been out there drinking all day, and people that maybe take a liking to the way that your wife looks in some short shorts. And 99% of the people that we met were fantastic. There is a passage in the book where I talk about a fisherman in the state of Mississippi, and he had invited us he had caught a bunch of catfish, and he had invited us to have like a catfish bake on the beach. And he seemed kind of odd to me, and I had that there was something in my gut that just didn't really fully trust what was happening. But I'm also like, I just don't like to offend people, so I kind of went along with it, thinking, well, how bad could this be? And he ends up towing our boat to an island, Cat Island, which is just over the Mississippi border. And once we got up on the beach, he pulls a 22 pistol out of his bag and starts asking about what kind of weapons we have on board. And I mean, we had a knife, but I wasn't carrying any firearms. And
right.
And he started insisting that we go back into the sort of wooded part of the island, and he was going to teach us about gun safety and take target practice and stuff like that. And it became clearer the more I talked to him that he was pretty inebriated, and he had he kind of took a liking to Mandy, which the whole thing sort of terrified me. He's got a loaded pistol and he's talking to Mandy like they're old friends. And and there was a there were some people that came along, I'll say that.
Yes.
And the situation changed pretty quickly. But that was the only time that I felt nervous around people. There was some wildlife out there. We did see a bear kind of approached our tent in in
Oh,
Minnesota.
right. Yeah, that's a great story actually. The nose, that's a pretty
Yes.
the nose of the bear in the tent. Yeah, that's a pretty
Yeah, we're laying in the tent and we hear something coming along the shoreline. At this time, we're in the canoe, and we thought, good. We're Mandy and I are whispering to each other, God, whatever that is really big, and it just sounds like it's lumbering along. And then the cooler that we had with the food in it was tucked underneath the overturned canoe, and this thing starts moving this 16-foot metal canoe to try and get to the cooler, and I guess couldn't get to it. And then maybe one of us had a candy bar or something in the tent. I'm not really sure. But as we're laying there, all of a sudden the sidewall of the tent starts to warp inwards. And there is the shape of a snout about 6 inches from my wife's face. And she just instinctively backhands what turned out to be a bear right on the face. And it climbed a tree, knocking down branches and stuff as it's going down. So that was a little thrilling to have a bear try and enter the tent.
Wow.
Yeah. But yeah, other than a drunken fisherman, a bear, and then of course, if you stay on the river long enough, you get to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where the scenery really changes and the boats on the water really change, because that's where that's the start of the petrochemical corridor.
Becomes pretty industrial.
Oh, very, very, very industrial.
That becomes more of a challenge, I think, too, for
yeah, very much so. There are ocean going tankers there. You know, you've got Exxon, you've got refineries there, you've got Dow Chemical, you've got all kinds of plants up and down the river on both sides of the river. And so if you're on the upper river or even the lower river, after you get past the dams and stuff, dams and locks in Memphis and all that, you can skirt the channel and sort of stay in the muddier avenues of the river, you know, sort of stay kind of on the edge and sort of avoid that stuff. But once you get down to Baton Rouge, it turns into such an industrial corridor that both sides of the river are choked with empty barges. It's just sort of a parking lot of barges. You can't access the shore in the same way. There are 1,000-foot long tankers that a canoe or a rowboat is virtually invisible to them. And once you get down there, there are no more channel markers in the river designating where the boats had to stay. It's so deep shore to shore, those ships, you know, they've got their line that they sail, but I don't recall seeing any buoys on the water telling us, you know, where the lane was. And so from Baton Rouge to New Orleans was really a pretty terrifying stretch.
Mm-hmm.
And we just did our best to stay between the parked barges on the banks and the shipping channel. And at times you sort of felt like you had to suck in your breath and sort of get real skinny to get by some of this stuff. And we had met a pilot. He was a pilot for a local pilot for these ocean going ships, because they cross the ocean, and then a local pilot, because he knows the water, a local pilot will take charge of the boat and bring it upriver to the refinery. Mm-hmm. And we got into a conversation with a pilot, and he was just aghast that we thought we were going to continue going downriver. He said, buddy, you have a death wish if you plan on going further. And you know, it's dangerous here, and it only gets more dangerous because the further down you go, the more shipping there is. And so after 2,000 miles, only being 100 miles from the Gulf, we decided that we'd sort of proven to ourselves what we had to prove. And we pulled the boat out of the water in New Orleans and sort of walked away from it thinking that we'd sort of achieved what we set out to achieve. And but so that starts the second part of the arc of the story, which is, you know, fast forward 16 years later, and Mandy and I, after moving all around the country and me working on boats, we've moved back to Tennessee. We have 2 young children, and to provide for them, I had been a trim carpenter and a cabinet maker, but to sort of provide a more stable income, I went back to school and became a CAD like I wasn't an architect, but I worked in an architecture firm doing those drawings.
Right,
And
right.
I learned very soon that I'm not a very good desk sitter atter. And so about 6 months into it, I decided I didn't really want to do it, but I couldn't leave because I had kids and
Mhm.
they were depending on me to provide health care and that sort of thing. And it didn't help when I turned 40 years old. And I was sort of, I just got waylaid by this thought of like, this is not the life that I thought I was going to live. In my 20s, we did this adventurous thing and we moved around the country I worked on some pretty big wooden boats, but I had, in my mind, I saw myself more as a traveler and an explorer and a craftsman and that kind of thing.
Right.
And here I was wearing khakis and a button-down shirt. And I also love talking to people. And I spent my days with earbuds in my ears, listening to podcasts or music. So it was a very isolating job. And I'm sure that my performance suffered because I was not really in any way passionate about it. It was just a predictable paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
And the place that I worked, we primarily did commercial buildings. We did schools and hospitals and that kind of stuff. And so I drew hospital rooms until I ended up in one, basically. And sort of had a bit of a meltdown or a nervous breakdown, I guess the term would be for it.
Yeah.
Where I really had some challenging days, where I was trying to cope with the fact that the life that I had planned on living, maybe not planned on living, the life that I had imagined myself living was so far from the life that I was living. And so I, reached out and found some good counselors and therapists to talk to help me. And, after a day in the hospital, I decided that I needed to make some changes. And one of those changes, I told the therapist I was seeing, I really want to go back and sort of reclaim who I used to be.
Right.
And that boat that meant so much to me when I was younger was sitting in our backyard. I'd never gotten rid of it just because I couldn't bear to get rid of it.
Couldn't, no.
But it had also never been back in the water. And so the boat just sat in the backyard and my kids used it as a shipwreck or a castle. It was just sort of something for them to play on and in.
Right.
But the thing about wooden boats is you leave them outside and they, if you neglect them,
deteriorate slowly. Yeah.
They will deteriorate. Yeah. And so I wanted to go back and finish the last 100 miles just to sort of prove to myself that I could do it and not let the pilot that I had talked to 16 years earlier scare me off of doing it. And we discovered as soon as we pulled the boat into the carport to paint it that, a lot of this boat is rotten. And so at this point now, my kids are 9 and 11 years old. And I sort of enlisted them as my child apprentices.
Yeah.
I was an apprentice back in the day when I was in my 20s.
Right.
And so they sort of became my apprentices, and we tore off all the rotten wood, the rotten planks, the rotten frames, anything that was rotten. We pulled it off.
Fun project with kids.
It really was. It was a fun project. And I sort of felt like my old self again. And so after a couple of months, we got her rebuilt, some fresh wood on the boat. We repainted it. And the four of us this time, as a family of four, took the boat down to New Orleans.
That's right.
Exactly where Mandy and I had pulled the boat out 16 years earlier. The four of us put it in to go finish the last 100 miles. And that certainly was not without its excitement and dangers and stuff and such. Yeah.
For someone, there's not a lot of people do this, but we're the nano cruising community, and probably people that are probably different. We do try these things. So if somebody else that want to try something like that, what are your thoughts, advice you would give somebody to start?
Well,
if it's the Mississippi, for example, because you're
Well, as far as it being a rare thing to do, there are plenty of people that do it.
Right.
However, it seems like a crazy statistic to me, but it's true that there are far more people every year that climb Mount Everest
Correct.
than go down the Mississippi River.
Correct.
So it is sort of it's a rare feat,
Yes.
certainly rarer than climbing Mount Everest. The thing that potential rowers, potential paddlers, or there's even a guy that did it on one of those stand-up paddle boards.
Right. Yes.
You know, and the summer that we did it, there was a guy who was swimming the river.
Right.
But for anybody that wants to do it, you know, having the internet now is just such a great resource for info. Like I said, we ordered our maps from the Corps of Engineers and just went for it. If you do want the maps just to look at them and study them, you can, if you go to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers website, they sell the charts out of Vicksburg and Rock Island. So there's two separate charts. There's the charts for the upper river are from the Rock Island district, and the charts for the lower river come out of Vicksburg, Mississippi. So if you get online, you can order the maps, the same maps that the towboat pilots use. And then the upper river from Lake Itasca down to Minnesota, that first 500 miles, there's a series of maps put out by the DNR, the Department of Natural Resources, out of Minnesota. And of course, we were dealing in all paper maps, and you can still order those. But the other thing that we didn't have that is a huge resource for people wanting to do this now, on Facebook, there is a group, I believe it's called Mississippi River Paddlers Group. I think that's the name of it.
Wow.
And there's all kinds of people. You know, I've seen people say, "Oh, I'm going to start the river in 3 weeks. Can anybody tell me the water level up at Lake Itasca?" And somebody that lives locally up there say, "Oh, yeah, there's plenty of water up here." Or
yeah, you can do that back then, right?
No. And I remember a year or two ago, it was kind of drought conditions up there, and a lot of people that were wanting to start the river were being warned, "Wait, just put it off 3 or 4 weeks. The water's too low. You're going to come up here and be dragging your canoe everywhere because there's no water up here." But the Mississippi River Paddlers page, boy, yeah, you just have to look it up on Facebook. It's such an incredible resource. The maps that the government puts out are great maps. And then if you want to read about somebody, you want to read a firsthand experience, I've got a book called Crooked Old River, which, you know, harking back to the Mark Twain thing, the title of the book when I was first writing it was called Chasing Twain, just because the boat that we built was sort of from his era, because those yawl boats they used them as lifeboats for the steamboats that Mark Twain was piloting. But as I was writing it, there's a songwriter named John Hartford, and he has a song called the Julie Bell Swain, and there's a line in there where he says, "Nothing like a crooked old river to straighten my head right out." And dealing with the sort of life changes that I was dealing with, and using a crooked old river to sort of straighten my head out seemed like an apropos title.
Yeah, that seemed very, very apt. Definitely.
Yeah,
definitely. The river itself and your life to that, you know,
so it's there's a lot of river stuff in there for somebody that's interested in doing the river. There's a lot about the history of the Mississippi Valley, and then there's also certainly a memoir aspect to it. About coming into midlife and sort of learning to make peace with sort of where life has brought you, or you know, where you've brought yourself. But you could check out Crooked Old River, or if anybody wants to ask me any questions, they can reach out to me on social media. I'm just Trapper Haskins on Facebook, on Threads, on Instagram. So I'm happy to answer any questions on there, even though I haven't been on the upper Mississippi in many, many years, but we were on the lower Mississippi pretty recently.
Do you still go? You still go on the river?
You know, we haven't been. I still get on rivers. Just I haven't been on the Mississippi in a while. We live in Middle Tennessee, south of Nashville.
Oh, okay. Oh, I
see. And there's a river called the Harpeth River that runs through here that we go canoeing on pretty frequently.
There you go.
We've been on the Cumberland River, which runs through Nashville. We've been on that river. And then anybody, I need to go take a trip with John Rusky. There's a guy in Clarksdale, Mississippi named John Rusky who has a company called Quapaw Canoe Company. And he takes people out on multi-day canoe adventures on the Mississippi. So if somebody's not, doesn't have 3 months, which is what this voyage took us, and they just want a taste of being on the lower Mississippi River.
That's a good idea. That's a good way
Yeah.
to get introduced to that too, right?
Sure,
So-
you can go out for 3 days, 5 days, something like that, and
Right.
they have these big Voyager canoes, so they'll take out big groups and go camping on the sandbars and stuff. And I can't say enough about the beauty of an empty sandbar on the Mississippi. Like watching the sunset out there, I would maybe take that over any beach on the Atlantic coast or the Gulf, or
Right.
yeah, it's just a magical place.
Nice. Thank you so much for all this information, and your story is fascinating. So
Yeah, Steph, thanks for having me so much. I really, really appreciate it. Very much, very much. I'm a fan of the podcast, listening to it, and honored to be a guest on it.
That was great. I highly recommended getting the book Crooked River. Great reading. I want to thank our listeners. Actually, a lot of the recent episodes are all suggestions from you, including today and the next two coming up. So it's a testament to the community. So thank you for that. Keep those suggestions coming in. We tend to have a lot of North American gear content, but I do want to hear from everywhere. New Zealand, Australia, England, as we have listeners from everywhere. So bring in those suggestions for any areas. In the next episode, we have Dan Roeder. He is the leader of the Florida West Coast Trailer Sailing Squadron. A little bit of a mouthful, but it's a great organization, so do come back for that. And until then, as usual, seize your own adventure.